Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. Maybe you've heard the word Ikigai or Ikigai, however you pronounce it as a non-Japanese person. It's a Japanese word that roughly means a reason to live or what gets you up in the morning, your passion. Although none of those definitions are actually really accurate. You really have to kind of get the Japanese to really get what Ikigai means. But we're not going to get into that right this minute. Maybe we'll get into it a little bit as I talk, because our guest today is all about Ikigai and connecting it to your career. She's an entrepreneur, a solopreneur. She's a translator. She speaks English, Japanese, and Polish. She is an expert working across cultures, especially when it comes to bridging so-called Western cultures with Japan and Japanese companies. Let's get right into it with the great Kasia Lynch. Kasia, great to see you.
Nice to be here. Thank you so much for such a fantastic introduction.
I try to do you justice, because the work that you're doing, Kasia, is just incredible. I mean, I've been following your career for the last few years. We connected probably just before the pandemic, I'd say, about a year or so ago. I had seen you on LinkedIn before that. And, because we kind of run in similar or parallel circles, being that Japanese community, right? That Japanese expat or repat community, right? But we met about a year ago, and we've stayed in touch since. And, I enjoy seeing what's coming through from your content on LinkedIn. You're one of the people that I like, okay, there's a cool new thing from Kasia. You do these great videos with these 1-minute translations or 1-minute lessons about interesting things that Japanese people say, or some things that you should use in Japanese business. I'm not going to spoil it for our listeners. I would just recommend they go check out Kasia on LinkedIn.
Thank you.
But we can talk about that a little bit. Anyway, I mean, it's really a pleasure to have you on the show. I think it's, a lot of times I have folks on who are, marketers or PR people or coaches. And I know you do a little bit of all those things being an entrepreneur, but I haven't had that many Japan people on. And I would put you more in that camp as one of my Japan kindred spirits and who's come back to the States. So welcome, konnichiwa. Nice to see you.
Konnichiwa. Yoroshiku onegaishimasu.
Yoroshiku onegaishimasu. Yes, and for my listeners, that means please be nice to me, literally. It's a formulaic thing that Japanese say to each other in business at the beginning of a relationship, and it's a really great way to kick things off. So yoroshiku onegaishimasu, let's be nice to each other. I never have to really ask Kasia to be nice to me, though, because it's just in your nature. And speaking of your nature, how did you get to be where you are, Kasia? Let's learn about Kasia and how you got to Japan, what brought you to Japan, and now back to the States, and what you're doing.
Well, thank you for asking. And I am quite humbled to be here, especially because I have been following your journey. And it's there's all these amazing people that you have interviewed. And I'm like, hey, really? Watashi de yokereba? I'd love to. If it, little old me, can I do this? But I'm quite honored to be here, and I'd love to share my journey. And I guess I describe it in such a way that everything has culminated to this point. All my struggles with looking for jobs in Japan and other countries, that's why I created the business that I'm doing right now. So I started to really get into Japan when I was in high school, and I was just a regular student of the Japanese language. And then they had to send somebody to Japan for an exchange program, and nobody wanted to go. So the teacher and my father said, oh, she's going to go. So I went to Shigaken, which is it was in the middle of nowhere outside of Kyoto. And
it's beautiful.
It was a life-changing experience at age 17. So those 4 months were absolutely pivotal. I was, it was the first, I'm of Polish descent. So I've been to Poland a couple of times as a kid, and I saw what it's like to live in a different country, but it was just a vacation and it was kind of comfortable for me. But here I am, 17 years of age, experiencing this world that was so different, and my life changed. I came back home a completely changed person, and I decided, there was something about Japan. So everything I did, it was in college. I went again to live in Kyoto for a year as a junior. And then I decided when I graduated from BU, I'm like, I have to go back to Japan again. So I got a scholarship to go back to Japan. I was there for the school program. It was a half a year of intensive language, 1 year of research, and then I stayed for graduate school for 2 more years. And then I just got even more addicted. So I decided I have to find a job here. And I'm just kind of like summarizing this a little bit. I can go into pieces later, but that first job in Japan was incredible. It was in the music industry, and I was introduced to translation and interpretation, and I decided I have to keep digging. So throughout all of my decisions, I wasn't really sure what the heck I really wanted to be when I grew up, and I still don't know what I want to do, but I just took the next step and next baby step. And then I eventually went into Poland, and I was working at a Japanese company there. And then I went to Italy, and of course, I did some freelance translation interpretation, but a lot of it was also me forcing myself to just kind of relax and enjoy, pizza and pasta and vino. And that was great. So came back home to Michigan, where I'm originally from, and just worked in the automotive industry for 5.5 years. And all that time, I've been constantly talking about my passion for Japan and using it in my job. So that's exactly why I now have this company called Ikigai Connections, because first I started just talking about it. People asked me questions. Oh, Kasia, can you tell us how to do this, how to do that? Started with a blog, eventually became a job board, created an online training program. And before you know it, it's nearly 3 years later, and here I am. And they're all baby steps to get to where I am. And I don't know what's going to happen in a few years, but there's still so much that can change. But I'm just kind of enjoying what I do, I guess.
Well, spoken like a true entrepreneur, I suppose, or solopreneur, as you said earlier. Before we started talking, we were talking about like you have to, when you know what you want to do, you just have to do it, and you have to just stop doing other things. And part of deciding to move forward on the path that you're on is this idea that you called it the no muscle when we started talking earlier, like just learning how to say no to a lot of things, so you can focus in on the one thing that you can do. And I heard, back to my very first podcast episode, probably I talked about one of my idols, Mr. Cliff Ravenscraft, who told me about, the fact that when you make a decision, it means killing all of your other choices, right?
Yes.
So you're choosing one thing, killing every other choice. So it sounds like it's a very similar thing. And, it sounds like you used a really interesting word to describe part of your journey, right? To get to where you're at. And the passion is clear. So Ikigai, I get it.
Yeah.
But you said addicted. You said that you were addicted to either Japan or to working in Japan. And I often talk about that because I say things like, for those of us who lived in Japan for a long time, it is like an addiction. So
yes.
It is kind of codependent. Sometimes it's really healthy and sometimes it's not.
Yes.
You can be a high functional Japan addict, or you can be an absolute, fool for anime, or whatever the other end of that scale is.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I think it's like an addiction, and I got to keep getting a fix.
Yeah.
And I found myself after all these years, I was in Japan for 16 years, but back here for 10 or 11 now, but I'm working for Japanese companies.
Yes.
So I get my fix, I suppose, that way. And the connection is strong and still there. And, I go back to Japan whenever I can. Obviously, recently with the travel restrictions, it's been tough. Maybe by the time this episode comes out in September, everybody will be beyond that. Japan is lagging behind a little bit, but I'm with you on this. It is like an addiction, but you seem to have parlayed that into your passion and your business.
There's just something about Japan that, especially a lot of my followers are the same way. It's almost as if they don't care what they do as long as they can use their Japanese language and or cultural skills. And when I lived in Japan, I was there for 8 years, which for me, I really could have stayed there many, many more years. There's just something about the personality of the people, the kindness, the way that the trains run on time. And I really like things that go on time. So for me, it was just, it was chaos for me when I moved to Europe after that. And the train doors are opening and people are getting on and off at the same time. I'm like, no, I miss Tokyo. So just like that kind of order, the quiet, the people's respect for other people. I mean, obviously, no country is perfect, and every country has its pluses and its minuses. And to me, yes, there were things about Japan that maybe I didn't care for. There's things about my home country as well. But there was just something that drew you in. And for me, it was also the language component, the puzzle of learning the language, and the support of everybody who I would learn a new word and they would just congratulate me for learning a new word. And they would be so supportive and wanting to like teach me another word and like extend, like, it was just, to me, it was just a lot of fun. So that, I think it was because of that great experience that I really wanted to use my language skills in a career. And it was extremely difficult for me to convince any employer when I was applying for these jobs in Japan. They're like, who do you think you are? Are you going to stay here long enough? Like, do we have to give you a visa? Like, what's up with you? Why are you here? And I've had that amazing experience of interviewing at these Japanese companies and sending out my resume to hundreds of places. And it was just this, like, I was on a mission. I had to make sure that I got to it. And I did. And it was difficult, but I got my first job. And then I kind of did the same thing in Poland and in Italy, and then in the United States again. And it made me feel good that I was kind of, at least in those areas, maybe in those industries, I was trying to help people out who come after me to do the same thing, to kind of like introduce the Japanese companies to people like me who really love their culture, which they just found amazing. They're like, really? You want to stay here forever? I'm like, well, yes, please hire me. So a lot of that was, maybe that's a little unhealthy, strange relationship, but I loved it.
Well, look, there's no accounting for taste sometimes. What can I say? No, really, we all have our little foibles, or the things that make us tick, the things that give us comfort.
Yeah.
And you rattled off a few of the things that make Japan, just lovely to be in and to hang out in and to live in. I mean, the trains run on time, everything's clean, it's safe, people are nice. What's wrong with any of those things? It's wonderful. Right. Once you start to dig into corporate culture and you're there for a while, that's when you really uncover, I think, some of the difficulties and challenges of being someone who has grown up outside of Japan, probably in a Western country for the most of us, but someone who's grown up in a different culture and then trying to make your way forward in Japanese culture. Because maybe this was the way it was for you, but for me, the first few years in a new company, or the first short period of time, is always awesome. It's great. Oh yeah, hey, Dan, he's the guy who speaks some Japanese. We like Dan, and he goes out and he drinks with us, and we like that, and it's great. And let's just go to work. Let's work hard, and let's go out and drink hard, and let's do these things together, and we're all together, and it's wonderful. And he speaks Japanese. Like, it always comes back to that. He speaks Japanese and likes to hang out. Great things. I'm very good at those two things. So I can always get by in Japan. I figure I like to hang out and I can speak Japanese. But, then you get into, okay, am I getting fulfillment from my job? Am I doing what I want to do? Am I on a career path? Because those things have different meanings to a lot of Japanese corporates. Thankfully, it is changing and has changed for many companies. I know that I speak proudly of my current employer when I say that, they are all about Ikigai. They're all about finding your purpose and living your purpose.
Nice.
And helping the company to achieve its purpose through your own purpose. I could say purpose 100 times. But it's really a refreshing look at a Japanese corporate culture that's changing. But it wasn't always so, right? Mm-hmm. So when you were going through Japanese companies and Japanese culture, what were some of the things that you would come across in your time working in Japanese companies that, you either overcame or that you kind of shifted your mindset a little bit and were able to work around? Because, there's no way to get rid of them. You have to either work around them or accept them. Yeah.
I think that, so if your listeners aren't too familiar with Japanese business culture, there is a thing that, you'll read about, that Japanese companies, they have lifetime employment. So that started back, and don't quote me on any dates or anything like that, but that was just historically, that's what you did. You worked at a Japanese company, they gave you security, and it was, great to have that kind of guarantee. But things are starting to change. And especially now, I've heard so many things, how during the pandemic as well, things have just started shaking up. And people are like, do I really want to stay at this company for a long time? I kind of want to try something different. Maybe I changed my mind. I've actually known a lot of guys who are like, I just want to be house husbands. Please let me stay home with the kids. And like all sorts of different ways of living, not the typical salary man that you go to, like you were just saying, go to work, work all day, you work hard all day, and then you go out drinking and you repeat the same thing over again. So there's just lots of people that are starting to share their ideas of maybe not working all the time. And then there's some people who they want to try something different. They don't they started off in one industry and they realized, hey, I actually kind of want to try something different. So that kind of job switching thing also is starting to happen more and more. For me personally, I think I'm very lucky. I've had some amazing experiences. I had Japanese bosses who they took me under their wing and they gave me opportunities before I was ready. So my very first job, my kaicho, my chairman, I was working directly with him.
Mhm.
He was the one that was kind of pushing me to do things that I wasn't ready for yet. And I thought that was very interesting. Maybe it's because it was the music industry. So it was a little bit different than a typical, corporate kind of feel. And then even though I was the only like non-Japanese person working at this small company, I felt like a part of the team. And, we were talking, it didn't matter what language we were talking in, we all understood each other. And I didn't get to have that kind of experience that you hear about now with these Japanese business concepts that you have to like the decision making and how difficult it is. So I didn't have that experience at first. And then my some other companies, I was able to kind of like I wasn't fully into the stereotypical Japanese business culture. So maybe I was sheltered from that in the beginning.
Mhm.
But I have experienced that in the automotive industry here in Michigan. And I also experienced a great company that was very globally minded. They were very willing to, have non-Japanese people involved in their meetings and in the business decision making overseas to become the decision makers in the overseas branches, which is something very difficult to do because a lot of times, again, stereotypically, you have this headquarters in Japan, they get sent overseas, and they have these smaller companies or branches that are still run by the Japanese headquarters, but they have support from the local team. But this was like fully empowering the local employees. So I might have a slightly different experience than what you have and what other typical Gaikokujin or foreigners have, but I've always enjoyed it. There's one thing that I often talk about is this thing called horenso, which is
Horrendous.
it's just basically it's the negative translation of it is micromanaging, and the good translation of it, and this is my translation, the good one is effective communication. So you hear about these horror stories within Japanese companies by Japanese people talking about how terrible horenso is. And then you've got these great experiences that are like, once you have this good communication among a team, it's like a well-oiled machine. So everybody's working together, they're keeping each other up to date really quickly, and it's just working nicely. So you have these two extremes, and you hear about the good, the pluses and the minuses from non-Japanese as well as Japanese alike. And I think that to summarize this point that I'm trying to say is that it really depends on your situation, your industry, what kind of people you're working with. So people can have varying experiences in Japan. So I always tell people, I don't like stereotypes. I really don't want to say Japan is like this, Japan is like that, Japanese companies are doing this. There's really all kinds of experiences, and it's how you interpret that situation too. You can be very optimistic and want to work things out and want to see this in a positive light, or you can be like, oh, heck no, I am not handling this. And you're very, put up a wall and you want to leave. So it also depends on how you perceive that as well.
Yeah. You're totally right. And no two Japanese working experience are the same. I mean, it is easy to make that mistake to think that you work for, one of the major Japanese companies. And I've worked for some big majors, and the experience in that company is a lot different than it is in a small, one man shacho kind of like small operation,
Right.
like with under 100, 200 employees. Totally different situation. And a lot of that has to do with exposure to the top person. I mean, you said you were working directly with your chairman, with your
Yes.
kaijo, and that's a great thing. I had a job right out of college. I went to the JET program, which I'm sure you've
Nice.
met many JETs, the Japan Exchange Teaching Program. Absolutely kicked off my life in a different direction than I had ever planned, and it was something else. But and you were in Shiga, I was in Mie, which isn't too far from
Nice.
Shigaken, so it's like real countryside experience, and it got me addicted to Japan for sure. Like that was the initial dose
Mhm.
that still is coursing through my veins, I think. I'm so sorry I came up with that horrible analogy or metaphor for it. It's not really like drugs, but it's part of you, right?
Yeah.
But after that, I moved to Tokyo, and I was working for this company that was doing English programs around at universities, and the CEO and owner was like like that. He was a charismatic Japanese guy who was Stanford educated and like built this company on his own. And, just there's a lot of stereotypical things about him, like pretty wealthy from running his own company in Japan, drove his Mercedes or whatever it was. And, only imported this is at the end of the bubble too. So like only importing like the best materials for his office. And, everything is like just top of the line this. And you go out to dinner. He's like, no, you don't want to have this. It's time. Have you ever had foie gras? This is where you like, I think that's funny. Now that I think about it, every foreigner I know who's lived in the countryside and worked in these small companies always has these experiences. And when I say foreigner, I mean non-Japanese person, always has this experience where a senior person in their company has introduced them to some of the most expensive, rarest delicacies anywhere, right? I mean, with this particular gentleman who is still a very important person to me and my wife, he actually, because of he introduced us essentially.
Nice.
He introduced me to foie gras and to some things that by the way, I've never eaten since, right? Never. What's the opportunity for me to do that and why? I mean, or to some other things that I, some other nice sake or something, like he introduced me to things. But, back to my point here, working at these major companies, small companies, the experiences are very different. And to me, it was just a matter of understanding that once you get past that like honeymoon period, that kind of holiday where everything's cool and you're just the fun person and, you're working hard and you're having fun with it, then you settle into life as a Japanese salaryman or as a Japanese worker. And there's nothing wrong at that point with saying, I think I've gone as far as I'm going to go. Right. But if you don't have the wherewithal to say that and you want to stick it out, then you have to learn to deal with the frustrations that are going to come.
Yes.
Right. And not put up that wall, because you're just going to drive yourself nuts and crazy.
Right.
And I think that I've been successful and failed a few times with that. There was a few times I've outstayed my welcome probably at a few of my jobs, but that's how you learn, right? Through those kinds of mistakes or experiences that you have.
And those are I would say that those aren't necessarily mistakes. It's all a part of life. We have to try something to see if we like it. And I mean, how am I to know if I'm interviewing for a company and for a particular position? How do I know that I'm going to enjoy it or not enjoy it within the next, year or a few years? How, I could learn something new. There's so many factors that come into play. So I often tell people, when you're trying to figure out what you want to do, this Ikigai thing that we talk about, right? You just have to think of that next thing that you want to do. Because if you are however years old and you think you got to find that one thing that's going to make you happy for the rest of your life, I don't think you're going to find it. I mean, some people do. Some people, I know somebody who was so into medicine wants to, the whole doctor thing for the rest of their life. Fine. But like, we are humans. We have things that happen to us. We read things, we get introduced to new topics, we meet new people, they introduce us to different things. So I think it's okay to be fluid in your decision making. And I think, when I deal with a lot of job seekers, I often hear, well, I shouldn't be a job hopper. It doesn't look good in your resume. I mean, in Japan, obviously that doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. It's worse in Japan than it is in the United States. United States is typical, like a couple of years, you move on to a different job and people don't want to be seen as this quote unquote job hopper. I did see something on LinkedIn the other day that we should stop making job hopping look so bad. I think that if you are growing and learning new skills, and if a company is open to bringing fresh talent every few years so that it's not so stagnant, I think there's really a positive spin we can make on this for both the job seeker, the employee, as well as the company. So, if you get to a point in your Japanese company or whatever company that, hey, I've reached as high as I could, I personally want to keep advancing, those opportunities probably aren't going to happen. Well, then maybe it's time to go somewhere else where you can continue that path that you want to be on. But if you don't do that, and if you stay stagnant and you want to keep moving, that's not going to be good for your mental health. And it's kind of one of the things about this pandemic, if there is, anything good that can come from it, is the fact that so many people have had these moments of realization that they're thinking like, wow, what do I really want to do? And so much has changed that they've had to force themselves to think differently about the job, remote work, sending kids to school, all of that. I mean, there's been so much happening in this last year that is just really affecting people's decisions and how they continue with their careers. And again, I'm always talking about careers because that's my thing, but
totally.
It can mean hobbies as well too.
Well, a career is an analog for so many other things that are going on in your life. I mean, it's one of the big decisions that you make. It's one of you spend a third of your life or more at a job. So career is quite a heavy topic. And I think it's perfectly good to frame everything and, with that, or talk about things with that frame of reference. What you've been saying about the pandemic, and certainly about, following, I think, ultimately your true north, trying to find what's the right thing for you. And if that means changing jobs every so often, then so be it. I completely agree with so many people who are quote unquote job hoppers, having been one myself, that you get to a point where you're not learning anymore and you got to go learn. You got to go do something else, or whatever, for whatever reason, the fit isn't there anymore. And it's time to move on. Do people make that decision rashly sometimes? And have I made that too quickly sometimes? Perhaps. But ultimately, you need to go where you need to go. And if you're, if you made a decision, a poor decision, hopefully you'll learn it was a poor decision and you'll course correct. But it comes down to, again, this concept, I think, of Ikigai, right? And of purpose. But I'm using them interchangeably, but I shouldn't be. I think it's slightly different. It's slightly different. I think purpose is more, we've talked about purpose many times on the show, but, it seems to be something that has become really, really popular during the pandemic. What's my purpose? What am I supposed to be doing with my life? Am I here to, as my friend Patrice Tanaka might say, she's here to bring joy to 7.5 billion people. That's her purpose. That's a hell of a purpose. And that's only part of her purpose. I'm narrowing it down a little bit, but is that her Ikigai? I don't think it's the same thing. So in your mind, what's the difference between like a purpose and Ikigai, if you had to kind of?
So when I first started this company, I was thinking of the word Ikigai because it's a Japanese word. I like the meaning behind it, which is something that, you get up to do in the morning. And then I saw those 4 circles, the 4 circles that I'm sure everybody has seen. They were made famous by Dan Butner in the book Blue Zones. And it talks about what you want to do, what you like to do, what you're good at, what you can be paid for. And it's just the intersection. There's got all these different words in it. Well, that ends up being a very westernized version of, and this is something that you helped, enlighten me with, because I have always been searching for who created these 4 circles, what Japanese person said that this is the 4 circles of Ikigai. So it turns out it was not a Japanese person, but it's a more westernized ideal, and they replaced the word purpose with Ikigai. So, but I still feel that based on that, I know that physically, I feel the words of these Japanese meanings. So for me, Ikigai does mean purpose, but it doesn't always have to do with your career. Me and my business, I talk about career Ikigai. So I have these 3 circles or 3 little things that connect, where it's about what you like to do, what you're good at with business world, and then your Japanese skills. So that's where I bring in the career aspect of the Ikigai with the Japanese skills. But Ikigai itself, it could easily translate to passion, but it doesn't have to be something that you must do or have to do. It can be something as simple as enjoying your morning coffee. It's just something that you wake up and you can't wait to do it. And I think that the definition can go really deep when you listen to the Japanese people talking about it. And we in the West, we're always about, I just think that we jumped on that really quickly and it became very popular. And I still use it. I appreciate that kind of definition because it's easy for us to understand. But I just think it's important to like what we do. So whether it's with a job or whether it's with friendships, relationships, or a hobby or something, if there is something in our lives that we don't care for, it just doesn't make us feel good, we feel it in our bodies that it's kind of stressing us out, then that's something that we need to pay attention to and maybe try to alleviate, maybe slowly get rid of the things that don't make us feel good. And if there is something that we do enjoy, well, then maybe we can focus on that to maintain happiness, because life is a journey. And one thing that I'm extremely vocal about is I tell people to don't always expect that. Yeah, I promote Ikigai all the time. Like, you do the things that you want to do, go for your dreams, but don't have these crazy expectations that it's going to happen immediately. Like, we need to have a little bit of delayed gratification. I think that with social media, people see these influencers and they have these amazing cars or outfits or purses or whatever. And you see this and you think, oh, I can get there. Or somebody has a dream job. I want that dream job. But they don't realize how much work goes into it. And, I wasn't used to social media when it first came out. I only started it because of my business just recently. So I've been kind of, I have this like love-hate relationship with social media, but I do think that it kind of skews that concept of our passion and going for our dreams because we think it's so easy and it should come right away. And we don't realize how it is baby steps to get to that. Life is a journey, right? We can't expect everything right away, all the goodness. It's good and bad.
Well, you're wrapping up a lot of things into this, like a discussion of Ikigai and this is kind of where I was hoping to go too, because it's not simple, right? It's not,
Yes.
This is one thing that Westerners have done is they take these words and they create 4 circles in the middle, Ikigai, there you go, you got it. But that's not it. And it's hard to explain why it's not it. It just isn't it. Sometimes you just got to go, there's an art to this.
Yeah.
There's part of this that you're not seeing. And I like how you described like different things that are like getting up and drinking a cup of coffee could be your Ikigai at the, certainly at the moment. I mean, reason to live, reason for living only touches on it too. It's that and its purpose. And it's something that I like to do. But it's all of those things and wrapped up. But it's kind of one of those things where like I feel that the Japanese have an understanding of feeling that goes beyond what our understanding of feeling is. I mean, even if they're feeling the same things, the way that they process it in terms of language and in terms of communication is culturally different. And that maybe more than many other things, that's one reason why it's hard for so many Westerners to really get into Japan because, just when you think you're there, somebody will point to the cherry blossoms and say how beautiful they are. And of course, hey man, I get wabi-sabi. I love it. Hanami is my favorite thing. And it is literally my favorite thing in the world is Hanami. Hanami is cherry blossom viewing, everyone. It is my favorite thing in the world. Ask my wife, ask anybody. My very favorite thing is to get up 5 o'clock in the morning at Komazawa Park in Japan or any place where there's cherry trees, throw out a tarp, get a couple of cases of beer and just sit down and just do nothing for 2-3 days. Right. And have my friends come and see me and hang out and, see the rotations of people that are walking around enjoying the cherry blossoms. The moment is the thing. The feeling is the thing. And it's the closest I've ever felt to Japan and to the closest I've probably ever gotten to even being Japanese in my mind, probably. I mean, and I've long since, gotten over that whole thing of being more A than B. I mean, I am who I am. But this whole thing, like, I think Westerners really try to force it in. And what you're saying about social media is instant gratification. It's connected. It's totally connected. That folks want the Lambo that they see somebody driving on and the quick rags to riches, find out this particular algorithm or formula and make millions and drop shipping or whatever it is that you're doing. Social media is poisoning the mind in that way. Old curmudgeon that I am. But I mean, it is in some ways a test to see if your Ikigai stands up, I think.
Nice.
I mean, I've just come up with that right now.
Nice.
But yes.
That's quotable. I think it's very true because you have to appreciate the journey to get there. You have to, like when you were talking about Japan and the cherry trees, there's another part of Japanese culture that kind of forces you to stop and think is the rock gardens, the Zen gardens in, especially in Kyoto. I took a whole class on this, and you're like, you even have to step through a really low door that you have to you're forced to just kind of pause. And even though you're in the middle of this huge city, you can literally, you are physically forced to just take a breath and to enjoy the moment. So granted, there's parts about, let's not kid ourselves. There's parts of Japanese culture where you're like going all the time, and you're going from work to drinking to quick hotel, hour-long train ride, whatever. Like there's just lots of chaos going on there too. But then there's parts of it that really, it's like this dichotomy, and it's really interesting. So back to the social media thing, and I think it kind of clouds our view because we don't see the behind the scenes of how to get there. And we assume that, I can easily, I'm going to have a job where I get paid $20,000 a month for something, which is in the very beginning for your first job might be completely impossible. Maybe there is one person or a couple of people who have done that, but let's not kid ourselves. There's a kind of growth. You need to grow. You need to learn. And if you want to get to from point A to Z right away, I really think it's important to get A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but you appreciate each of those steps along the way. And that's a part of Ikigai because you're appreciating the little things in life, the happiness that you can find, not thinking that you will get happiness once you get to Z. You just have to appreciate it. But I forget about this all the time too. Like I'm a goal-oriented perfectionist. So I absolutely have been, my entire life. It's like, I have to get good grades so I can graduate, so I can get a good job, so I can do this and pay off my loans. And I've always been this goal-oriented person. So I kind of forget to pause and enjoy and appreciate the moment. It's so hard to do, even me talking about Ikigai, but it's just something that I just think it's important to keep that in mind, because otherwise we're chasing things and we're never going to feel content.
Totally. Taking a pause and just going at the appropriate pace. Look, you don't really get that often when you're just starting out when you're younger, and social media isn't helping the situation at all for a lot of folks. Look at everything that's going on now. I mean, we don't talk about politics on this show, but but I've been looking at, the markets lately, and it's just nuts, right? I mean, anybody who's into crypto, at the time of this recording, it is May. It's beautiful May day here in New Jersey. The idea of like these of Bitcoin and Ethereum and whatever these different cryptocurrencies. I mean, I'm definitely not an expert at all, and certainly by talking about it in this way, you probably now know I'm not an expert in it. But it's been crazy up and down, volatile. Elon Musk says one thing, and the entire Bitcoin value crashes, right? So this is the world we live in now. My point is that it's this kind of fast up and down. Everything changes quick, and you have people who are on either end of that. That's that kind of, they're on both ends of that volatility, trying to cash in and make a fortune.
Yeah.
And what we really need to do is breathe.
Yep.
Like just breathe. Just take a breath. Is this your Ikigai? Is your Ikigai to go and like watch, currencies go up and down? Hey, maybe it is.
Right.
But I think a lot of people are just like, it's one of those things where you get caught up in this stuff and you have to sit back and wait a second. Wait. What's important to me? What is it? Because I'll get there if I do what's important to me and I pursue what's important to me and to others in such a way that I'm able to, serve others, bring out my best self. Many of the things that we've talked about on the show in the past. But to your point, like I think the world is arrayed against a careful consideration of purpose, of, Ikigai.
Because there's so many messages. There's so many people telling you this and that and that. And, when people come to me, they're like, I don't even know where to start to begin thinking about my Ikigai. And so I say, one thing you can do is just to get quiet, turn off your phone for just like, I don't know, an hour, maybe sit and take a piece of paper and think about writing in a journal, or maybe just meditate, even if you don't know how to do it. It feels really strange because you keep hearing all these messages and you don't know what's your message. And I made this point before. I was listening to your other podcast from Kate.
Mm-hmm. Kate Bagoy.
Yes. Yeah, she said, listen to what you want. It's so hard to do that when you hear everything like on megaphones, right? But if you I really think it takes practice, because I'm in my 40s and I didn't start doing this until just recently, but you really just have to get quiet and you just have to think, how do I feel in this situation? Do I appreciate this? Do I not? And you just start it with let's say one decision a day. And then like eventually you start to like trust yourself, and it's the intuition, or just the feeling that you like something or you don't like something. And then eventually you can take those baby steps to figure it out, because people are so confused right now. They have no idea what they really want to do. But then if you don't try something, if you just think about it and if you're in your head, you won't get anywhere either. So that's why you have to take steps and do something. Like, let's say you deliver for Uber, right? Or Uber Eats. You figure out, you do that and you're like, you know what? I actually don't like the whole money concept. I'd rather not get involved with money. Or maybe you're like, you know what? I like to work from home on my computer where I don't have to deal with people. Or maybe you love the interaction with people. So you just take those breadcrumbs and you keep moving forward to figure it out. But unless you try, you're just bombarded with messages of what you should wear and what you need to do. And
it's hard to get your own, it's hard to get into your own head, never mind out of it.
Yeah.
So something you said actually about where you are in your life right now, and you just listen to, what you want to do. As Kate said, you got to listen to what you want to do, whether it was your feeling or your intuition. I do think that some of it is intuitive. Some of them, just knowing what you want to do is intuitive. I don't know art, but I know it when I see it, type of a thing,
Right.
But at the same time, you got to remember, you've got a couple decades of life experience, right? That's all standing behind every decision you make.
Yep.
There's that life experience. Now, if you're 20 or 21, just out of college, you don't have a lot of life experience. You still have very valuable intuition. You still have very valuable, hopefully you have a moral compass that gives you the choices that kind of helps guide you in the direction. And if you don't feel like you have that compass developed, that's why you need mentors. That's why you need people. That's why you need to try new jobs and do different things until you figure it out. But read books, the world is at your feet, but don't go listen to certain, social media to get your direction from. That's a no-no, I think. Or it's a you'll regret it probably at some point.
A lot of people feel bad.
Yeah. It's not fulfilling, I think. But look, you base your decisions on the things that you need to do or want to do, and that's kind of living out your Ikigai in some ways. I wanted to ask you, really just kind of dig a little more into your business though, right? Because if you've come to it, I'm not going to say it wasn't by accident. That's the wrong thing to say. But you have evolved this.
Yes.
Right? It's been a real evolution. Starting off from, just trying to help people make connections. Mm-hmm. Though it's in the word is in the name of your company, Ikigai Connections. Connecting one purpose to another, connecting one reason to another. I mean, it is what it sounds like. And you've eventually become one of, I think, the leading job boards in America, at least, for people looking for a very specific type of a job where you're using Japanese language.
Yes.
So I remember long ago and not too long ago, being in a position where I'm looking for a job and looking for exactly that, looking for jobs where I could use my Japanese. And whatever the search algorithms were at the time, whatever jobs were available at the time, it would always come down to basically three things. It would be auto sales, or it would be accounting, and it would be a sushi chef. Those are the three jobs that kept coming up, right? So, back in those days, there was job boards really, kind of exploding at the time, but it wasn't doing me any good. How do you first of all, what are the types of jobs that are out there for people looking for Japanese jobs, but also how have you kind of seen that change, that whole industry and that whole world?
Yeah. So like I said, I first started off with Michigan. I was focused just on the companies that I knew because I'm familiar with them and the people that work there. So the pandemic is what forced me to start thinking externally, meaning other states. And then I actually went a little bit too far ahead of myself and I started including Japan and other countries as well, which just this past March, I decided, no, I think I need to focus because I was just getting exhausted. It was just too much of a coverage. Plus, Japan is already covered with all these amazing companies. I mean, there's really a lot of companies that are already dealing with this. So I decided to focus on just the United States. And in the last couple of months, things have definitely increased. And my go-to or my dream is to become the go-to job board for all Japanese jobs in the United States. And I'm getting there slowly but surely.
Mm-hmm.
So I think today there's about 300 some job ads on there, which is started off with one, right? And then slowly but surely it continues. Currently, the ones that I have are probably more manufacturing based. There's a lot for like the automotive industry because that's where I'm focused in Michigan. Of course, there's, accounting. There are, of course, some restaurant ones in there too. And that's, I actually have to say, I know so many people that worked at Japanese restaurants and they were able to get a great lesson in using polite forms of Japanese at these restaurants because they heard it all the time and they could practice their Japanese. So I decided to keep those ads on my job board as well. But as of right now, and again, the economy is now kind of opening back up, but a year ago, there was really nothing. I mean, I was even following things like Indeed and those, and everything for Japanese was just nothing every day. It was kind of scary. So here I'm trying to, inspire my job seekers to just, polish up their resumes, practice their interviewing skills, but there was nothing for them to even apply for. Now things are a little bit better. Hopefully things will continue improving. And I hope to see all kinds, but basically to answer your question, there's literally all industries are covered here in the United States. They all have Japanese representation. So whether it's manufacturing, finance, banking, probably the same thing, recruiting, chemicals, pharmaceuticals. I mean, every industry has some kind of Japanese presence. So whether you are interested in a particular industry or you're interested in a particular position, I really think there's a lot that you can find. And before, when I was doing my job searching, I couldn't find too much. It wasn't really like, maybe the companies weren't appreciating the language skills, or maybe they assumed that it would be the Japanese expats coming from overseas to come do those jobs here in the United States. But there's just not enough Japanese people to go around to all these global locations. So I think that, and this is one of my passion topics as well. I talk about this kakehashi employees, where people like you and I who have studied Japanese and we really want to use it. I want to introduce us to these Japanese company decision makers to say, hey, listen, we want to use our language and our cultural skills. Please give us an opportunity to help connect you with your headquarters, and whether it's a linguistic form or a cultural form, sharing anything you want, we would love to do that opportunity. So that message still isn't fully out there. I'm talking about it ad nauseum, and people are still like, really? Well, I think you would have to be Japanese to do that. And I'm like, no, please consider us as well, because we are so into it. We are so passionate that I think that should be a plus to any company if you have an employee that really wants to work there. So again, any industry, any role, and I'm hoping to showcase as many as possible over the next foreseeable future.
Well, do you think so? That's an interesting situation. It seems like it's changed. Well, I know it's changed a lot since when I was younger, and now I work for Japanese companies. But I didn't get these jobs through job boards. I've just gotten to points in my career where, I know the right people, I suppose, and I guess I've now recently become comfortable saying I'm a relatively accomplished person in my field. So I own it, and I'm happy to own it.
Nice.
But, it reminds me, though, back when I was looking around, after the JET program, I came back to the States for a brief amount of time in between jobs. And I was at one of the many Japanese job agencies, Japanese temp agencies that were around at the time. Now, remember, this is 1993, right? So, sorry, this would have been 96. And still, Japan had been, it was the second largest economy at the time. Now it's the third, but it was the second. It was still massive from the heady times of the 80s and very early 90s, which was called the bubble.
Right.
And I didn't realize it at the time, but that was actually right at the very beginning, or sort of right in the middle of the lost decade of Japan, where the country just stopped growing. It was a terrible time economically to be looking for a job in Japan, to be honest with you. But anyway, I didn't know that. I just went to these agencies, and I'm like, well, I can speak. I've got 3 years I've got a minor in Japanese, so I've got some pretty good Japanese under my belt. But then I spent the last 3 years at bars and singing karaoke, so my Japanese is really it's really good for hanging out with people. Not so great in the office, but hey, I'm a foreigner. I can get away with that.
Right.
Right. Which turns out you really can't, by the way. But I thought I could. But the thing is, right, they took a lot of interest in me. I interviewed on so many jobs, but I didn't get any. I didn't get any of the jobs I interviewed for in New York at the time. And I remember the closest I came was for Fuji TV and
Nice.
Super Morning, that great show, right? So I was interviewing for a position at Fuji TV. And I was so excited because I'd gotten to a couple interviews and I was like, yeah, Fuji TV, I didn't care about making any money. They wouldn't pay much, but I was like, hey, this would be the greatest thing.
Yes.
Sure, I'll get up at 4:00 in the morning every day. Sounds great. So I get to this interview and I'm in a room full of Japanese folks and it went okay. They asked me they asked me something about what are my jakuten, my weaknesses.
Yes.
I blanked. I didn't know what jakuten was at the time. Like my vocab wasn't exactly, I don't know, I wasn't functioning at the moment, but I was just like kind of blanked. Didn't get the job. And I didn't get it because of the mistakes that I made in that interview. Now, that really scarred me from using my Japanese language as a like from putting myself forward as a Japanese speaker.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't speak perfectly and I would forget things. So therefore, Japanese companies wouldn't look at me unless I could speak perfectly, which is nonsense.
Yeah.
But at the time, that's what I believed.
Right.
So I spent a lot of years just sort of denigrating my own Japanese language ability, saying, yeah, well, I'm okay, I'm good enough, I can work, I'm decent, and I have business Nihongo, I'm okay. But really, then I'd get into the office and people would say, Dan, your Japanese is great, right? I mean, I'm not speaking Keigo necessarily, and the polite Japanese. I'm not writing. I can read it okay, but it discouraged me a lot. These days, what's it like now for people looking around? Like, how good does your skill have to be? How good does your language need to be to actually say, I'm looking for a Japanese job?
This is such a loaded question, and I will try to not take over the next 5 hours with this topic. I'm actually doing a webinar on this topic next month.
Oh, great.
But basically, I think that this is my opinion. This is my observation. I think a lot of Japanese companies are expecting extremely high levels of their candidates, and they require it. They require the Japanese language proficiency test, the top level. And a lot of people are discouraged by that, not to mention that last year the JLPT was canceled because of the pandemic. So there's just a lot of discrepancy right there. And I'm trying to kind of ease the minds of the employers by saying, hey, I realize that you want the best of the best, but you have to give people the opportunity. Give them just a little bit of time, 2 weeks. They will pick up your lingo because they can't learn your lingo in school. They can't learn it in a class. They have to learn it on the job. So I want them to give these opportunities, even if somebody is just, intermediate. I would say at least intermediate. So, and you can get there with at least 3 years of college Japanese, plus a little bit of practice and taking this test. But this test also doesn't see how you speak as well. And it's so focused on like non-Japanese or non-business Japanese. So it's like the grammar, which I learned all this grammar for this test. And I'm like, I don't know if I've used it. I probably used some of it, but like the really hard ones, I don't think I have repeated it. So there's another test called the BJT, Business Japanese Test. And that one is a little bit more appropriate because it your email exchange, your phone in conversations. So I'm encouraging employers to be a little bit more lenient with that. And I'm encouraging job seekers to not be so, I want them to be a little bit more confident to go out there. And like you were just saying that, you felt kind of that you couldn't use your Japanese, you didn't feel confident with that level. But I think that as long as you are willing to put in the work, you want to try, you are studying, you're keeping up with your language, and you're doing things, whether it's a conversation practice or watching TV, practicing karaoke songs, at least you're doing something to keep up your Japanese. It's a language is a growing, living thing. The words, words are made up all the time. They're created from whatever is happening in the world. And Japanese is just like that. So I think, and it's also different depending on the industry, as well as within the industry, different companies within those industries. So I think even if you have a few years of Japanese under your belt, and if you want to use it in a career, you absolutely should try to do that and convince the employers that you just need a little bit of time to learn their lingo, because otherwise it's a standstill. Nobody's going to get anywhere, and it's kind of disappointing.
Yeah, that's great advice. The other thing that I would always say to anybody who's looking to get a role with a Japanese company is connections matter,
Oh, yes.
like tremendously.
Yes.
There were times. So I spent a little time as a recruiter in Japan back in the day as well. One of many things I did.
Nice.
And I remember recruiting for salespeople. And the questions that we would ask salespeople are like, so can you speak Japanese well enough to go into a room and talk about this, the technical details of this? Oh, yeah, I could do that. How many meishi do you have? How many business cards do you have?
Ooh.
Oh, well, yeah, I have this. How many? Let me see them. Right?
Good
if you're a real
question.
salesperson in Japan, you carry around your book of meishi. This is then.
Yeah.
Okay. Now it's how many LinkedIn connections do you have?
Yeah.
Right? Or how many people online are on whatever, any
Facebook
of the
too.
Japanese Facebook, or just how many people are in your address book. This kind of thing, nobody's carrying around the meishi books anymore. Although I wouldn't be surprised if they do.
Right.
But like the connections that you have matter. And there's still, like, I don't know what the figures are. You probably know better than I do, Kasia, that a certain percentage of jobs are still obtained through personal connections rather than through direct application. So when you're applying for a job where you don't know any, where you have no like introduction, then your skills really need to be what says on paper,
Yes.
right? Or as close as possible, right?
Yes.
But you always get a little leeway if you're being brought in by somebody else.
Right. Because that person who's who's recommending you, they're really putting themselves on the line, because if you end up being a lousy hire,
Oh yeah.
they kind of feel responsible for that. And that person who hired you is going to be like, hey, you gave me some idiot over here. What's up with that? So they're really putting themselves on the line if they do recommend you. So if you have these relationships with people and you strengthen them, it's not just a one-time deal. It's actually, you could be working with somebody, let's say through a networking, an organization here in the United States. We have Japan American societies, we have business societies. You could know each other for like a decade. And then over time, it's that little, meeting at these networking events or New Year's parties. And those people know who you are. And if something comes up they feel is a good fit for you, they will definitely consider you. And that's how so many people have gotten their jobs. So yeah, starting out is very difficult, but if you can focus on people, the relationships, trying to go get yourself out there. And I'm an introvert / extrovert. I've become more introverted with the pandemic, but it's hard if you're so shy, especially if you have to do it in a different language. And it's just terrifying. But if you just try it one step at a time, and most Japanese people are so kind anyways, they'll be like, oh, what are you doing? And where did you study Japanese? Oh, Nihongo jouzu desu ne. Your Japanese is so good. So then you get welcomed to the group. And it's, very important point.
Yeah. And exactly. Just make connections, go out. Like, I'm a big proponent, obviously, of making connections. I've made one with you, Kasia, just over the last year. You're one of, you're one of the people now, important people in my network. And
nice.
that's just the way that things happen.
Yep.
And I know, right, that the more people that I connect with organically, naturally, people who are within my sphere, it's not always going to be, I'm going to help you, you're going to help me. But the chances of something happening are very, very, very much increased. And, you grow your network of affinity, and opportunities then increase just naturally, right?
Absolutely.
That, and get the skills, man. Like, keep the skills sharp.
Yep.
Got to be able to speak the Nihongo. If you're going to say you speak Japanese, better speak Japanese.
Yep. And have something else in addition to that as well, too, because just Japanese language skills will get some people partly there. But if you have an engineering background, or you're really good in math, you've got accounting, you're good at, medical or any other field, if you can combine that with your Japanese, it's amazing.
And then the last thing, I know we're really, I can't believe we're already at an hour, but
wow,
this has been a great conversation. But one thing I did want to point out, something you said, another term you used was kakehashi.
Yes.
And the connecting bridge, right? That's my loose translation. I don't know if that's the right one. I'm going to yield to the expert here. Is that what you say as well?
Bridge in Japanese, yes.
Yeah. So the bridge to connect one culture to another is a really valuable thing to be.
Yes.
It may be difficult or challenging.
Oh yeah.
To convince somebody that you are a kakehashi, or that you are, that's the value that you bring. But to be able to speak Japanese, to have some other normal skills like normal, meaning like engineering or law or whatever it is, and have that personality, have that kind of ability to reach across cultures and have empathy and understanding, get the culture, don't judge, be humble.
Yeah.
And humility is a massive part of being a
Yes.
kakehashi, right?
Yes.
I want to talk about that a lot more with you, but we didn't get there. We'll say that for the next time. But if you can do that, I think that's the other part of the equation in looking for a role with a Japanese company, and frankly with any company, but certainly with a Japanese company.
Yeah, and you can. I mean, obviously, in the past and to this day, you would have probably hired an interpreter translator, somebody to help you bridge that gap. But if you're just doing that part-time, that's one thing, that's fine. But if you have an employee, even entry level, who has been to Japan, understands what it's like to give a greetings, business card exchange, or maybe has some experience with, in a meeting, or understands what it's like to come to a decision in Japan, or what yes or no really means in the context of a business conversation. If you have that kind of knowledge, then and an understanding and open-mindedness, so like you said, as well as mutual respect, I think you bridge this gap so much better, and it just unites the two cultures together. So this is kind of different, but I've talked about this so many times. My former employer still laughs about it, and they totally agree. I think karaoke is a great way to break the ice. You start building a relationship, and you realize that the person that you've been dealing with, because let's say, you visit Japan on a business trip and you've been dealing with somebody for the last year, and now you finally meet them face to face. Go to karaoke, you are best buds. And after that, you realize, oh, wow, I was kind of misinterpreting the emails that came in. I thought they were really, wishy-washy or too straightforward or too this or too that. And then you realize that it's actually a human on the other side. They just have different ways of explaining it, especially if you're doing it in English, which is not their native language. So you just open up your mind to being more communicative, definitely more open-minded, and I just think a kinder person. So that's what it's all about, right? Just mutual respect, trying to understand.
I'm the biggest fan of karaoke. And I introduced you to Neil Schaefer a while back, right? And Neil,
I heard your podcast about karaoke. I was like, yes.
We did a little karaoke live on the podcast. I'm not going to ask you necessarily to do that now, but what's your go-to song when you do?
My Hachiban?
Yeah, what's your
my go-to song? Typically, it will be one of two songs, and one of them is Urufuruzu Banzai Kimi ga Suki de Yokatta. That's like you started off with a shout, Banzai, and I'm tone deaf. Yes. So that gets the mood going. And then I have this one enka song that I like.
Which one?
An enka song.
Uh-oh.
And I actually still struggle with reading the lines. And enka is this older, more traditional way of singing. And it's really hard to understand their Japanese sometimes, but it's Yoshi ikuzo. Ore konna yada, ore konna yada. And that is just a hard song to sing. But I like to do that because it's a conversation starter. And they ask, where did you learn this? Oh, and I learned it from this person and da-da-da. And it's a way to practice your Japanese too. So
it's fantastic.
Karaoke is amazing.
Karaoke is the best way. It is a great way to learn Japanese. A great way to learn kanji, to learn to read Japanese. And, I spent so much time, more time than you want to know, in karaoke bars when I was in Mie, back when I was in my early 20s. And it just stuck with me. I love it. I'm a big fan. And I spoke about it with Neil. And you brought up Wolfels was a big song then.
Yes.
That was actually a hit when I was doing the karaoke route circuit. Wasn't one of my songs, but I was often I would hear it at least 4 times a week at the time.
That's awesome.
So it's a respectable Juhachiban. I mean, mine is Musko by Okuda Tamio. Oh. And that's the one I sang with Neil.
Okay. I don't think I know that song.
Ga ichomai ni heya no sumikko zutto mite yagaru. Oh, I love that song.
Okuda Tamio is very good. I don't think I know that song.
Yeah, it's not. I don't know. I mean, you have to kind of get in. You have to know.
Yes.
You know, it's not like it's not like Puffy.
Right.
But yeah, I think that kind of brings us to wrap here with this great piece of advice, which is kill him with karaoke. That's what I think.
Yes.
It's not kill him with kindness. Kasia, This has been such a fun conversation. I want to talk to you more about Japan and stuff, and we will. And, hopefully after all this craziness is lifted, we'll be able to head back again.
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, by the time this airs, this will be in September. So,
Nice.
I mean, I'm already vaccinated, and my family is, and they're going to Japan over the summer. My wife's Japanese, and they are, they're able to go because they all have Japanese citizenship, and I don't. So, but my company will bring me over as soon as the travel ban is lifted.
Yes.
And then I can do some real karaoke over there, and pretty excited about it. I'll, be able to regale you with tales of how Japan is doing these days. Do you plan to get back and forth every now and then? Do you plan to go? Yeah.
I would like to. The last time was, I think my business trips ended in 2016 when I was still working at my previous company, and I haven't been back since. Yeah. Funny enough, with this pandemic, I've met so many people via Zoom that are in Japan. And so previously would think, hey, next time I go to Japan, I'll set up, we can go to a izakaya, we'll meet up then. But now it's like, I've actually already met them. I have good friends now that when I do visit, and I would like to absolutely, probably after this Olympics fiasco is going to be determined, but I would like to go back, especially Tokyo. Tokyo is like a second home to me.
I know it. Where did you live, by the way, in Tokyo when you were there?
All over, but it was mostly Nakano, Ikebukuro, and Asakusa.
That side, okay. I was Komozawa mostly.
Okay.
I lived all over as well, but I ended up Meguro, Komozawa, and Toritsu Daigaku, like that area.
Nice.
So, love it there. And look, I mean, listeners, get to Tokyo. You'll understand what we're talking about. That's all I can tell you.
Yep.
But Kasia, it's been a pleasure. If anybody wants to learn more about Kasia, check out her LinkedIn profile. Her name will be spelled properly in the episode title, but it's very Zkasia. Just look for her, and she's the only one. She's like the artist formerly known as It's Just Kasia, out there. And then go to ikigaiconnections.com.
Yes.
And again, it'll be spelled in the notes, but ikigaiconnections.com, and you'll learn a lot about Kasia. And I'm sure that, and the other thing that I would recommend is absolutely following her on LinkedIn. The language lessons that you and your friend, your colleague do.
Yes.
For learning like little Japanese things, New Year's greetings, and I made my staff watch the New Year's greetings.
Nice, thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I was working for Mitsubishi at the time, and all of our managers were Japanese. So my staff wasn't. So I had them study up a little bit and be able to go to them and say, "Akemashite omedetou gozaimasu," and so on. So
nice. Yeah, I've been
great stuff.
Just sharing. It's just the little bits. Even if you don't if you don't know the language, but you are working with Japanese people, whether it's a client or your boss or whoever, you just learn a couple of these phrases, and they immediately are. I promise you, they will be so impressed. And you will get a great reaction from that. So
100%. And if you listen to, if you go to Kasia's LinkedIn, you'll find these things, these videos. They're fantastic. You. So Kasia, any last words? Anything else before we
I just want to say one last thing. I think that, we're talking about Ikigai and going for your dreams. And I just want everybody to know that I think as long as you put effort into it, and if you don't have these crazy expectations that you have to have a perfect answer now, I think the hard work has to kind of come. It's not going to be super easy. So just don't be afraid of that hard work. And we all deserve to be happy. So just take those steps and aim to be there. So that's it. I'm very passionate about that.
That's awesome. I'm so glad that you're living your Ikigai.
Yes.
And it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
If you enjoyed this episode of The Dan Nessel Show, please head on over to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or the podcast player of your choice to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. And please don't forget to spread the word. Thanks for listening.